Yesterday, Aaron Rodgers spoke for the first time since the season ended. He's still unclear if he's coming back to Pittsburgh. If you had a quarterback draft for next year only, Aaron Rodgers would make my top 10. And you think that's crazy, but the Steelers were a broken, dysfunctional offense. I thought Aaron had a great year. It was a completely broken ecosystem offensively.
Few players in modern football spark debate the way Aaron Rodgers does. For years, Rodgers was seen as one of the most gifted quarterbacks the NFL had ever produced. His arm talent, football IQ, and ability to deliver spectacular throws made him must-watch television every Sunday. But today, the conversation around Rodgers feels very different. Now the debate is louder than ever.
I don't know. When we saw Omar Khan at the Combine, he sounded like a guy that wants to sign Aaron Rodgers.
Yeah.
The same, what I just basically said, with all due respect to him, I'm talking about a first-ballot Hall of Famer here.
Some fans still see Rodgers as a generational quarterback whose brilliance should never be questioned. Others believe the story of Rodgers' career has shifted from dominance to controversy. Every season now seems to come with new headlines that extend beyond football. Interviews, comments, and off-field narratives often become just as discussed as his performances on the field. That shift has changed how the public views him.
They didn't turn it over. They didn't have penalties. They were good in the red zone. They were good after the catch. That's Aaron. And they averaged more points than the Philadelphia stacked Eagles. What else changed? It was Aaron. For 17 games, I would take Aaron over all but about 8 guys in the league.
Once upon a time, Rodgers was simply admired for his play. Analysts debated whether he had the most natural quarterback talent in the league. Teammates praised his leadership during championship runs. Fans saw him as the calm and calculated successor to Brett Favre in Green Bay. But the modern NFL media environment amplifies everything. Every statement becomes a headline, every opinion becomes a talking point. And with Rodgers, those discussions rarely stay quiet for long. Whether it is criticism from former players, heated debates on sports talk shows, or endless conversations across social media, Rodgers has become one of the most polarizing athletes in football.
Do you tell Rodgers if you sign here we're drafting a rookie in the first round at your position?
That is what makes the current moment so fascinating, because the debate surrounding Rodgers is no longer just about statistics or wins. It is about reputation, leadership, and legacy. And as the discussion grows louder, one question keeps appearing in every conversation about his career. Is the story of Aaron Rodgers still being written as one of greatness, or is the narrative slowly changing into something far more complicated?
But I think he unintentionally revealed something very significant about the Steelers and their plans that everyone missed from this interview.
There's no contract, offer or anything, so there's nothing that I'm, having to debate between them.
To understand why the debate around Aaron Rodgers has become so intense, you have to remember how dominant he was at his peak. Rodgers did not simply become a good quarterback. He became one of the most efficient and talented passers the NFL had ever seen. After taking over for Brett Favre in Green Bay, Rodgers quickly proved that the Packers had found another superstar under center. His accuracy was extraordinary, his ability to extend plays outside the pocket turned broken situations into highlight moments, and his deep ball precision made defenses look helpless. Over time, the accomplishments began to stack up.
But at some point, they're going to have to put a contract in front of him. It did sound like on Pat's show he would be willing to receive one from the Pittsburgh Steelers.
Rodgers won multiple league MVP awards, putting together seasons that analysts still describe as some of the most efficient quarterback performances in NFL history. He led the Green Bay Packers to a Super Bowl victory and established himself as one of the faces of the league. During those years, the debate about Rodgers was very different. Instead of questioning his leadership or his reputation, analysts debated whether he might actually be the most talented quarterback to ever play the game. His arm strength, mechanics, and improvisation were often described as unmatched. Even players around the league spoke with admiration about Rodgers' ability. Defensive coordinators constantly talked about how difficult he was to prepare for. Teammates praised his command of the offense and his confidence in high-pressure situations. By the time Rodgers entered the later years of his career, his Hall of Fame credentials were already secure. The statistics, the MVP awards, and the championship had already cemented his place among the greatest quarterbacks ever.
I want to say that anybody on here who's expecting me to make some big decision, just shut up. Just turn it off now. Just leave.
But in sports, legacy is never defined only by the peak. It is shaped by how the story evolves over time. And for Rodgers, the later chapters of his career have introduced a new narrative that has complicated the conversation about his greatness. For most of his early career, Aaron Rodgers was known primarily for his play on the field. But over time, the public image surrounding Rodgers began to shift. The headlines started to change. Instead of focusing solely on touchdowns and game-winning drives, discussions around Rodgers began to include controversy. Comments during interviews, disagreements with critics, and ongoing debates about his opinions quickly became part of the broader narrative surrounding his career. And in the modern sports world, narratives spread fast. Television debates dissect every statement. Social media amplifies every reaction. What once might have been a small disagreement suddenly becomes a national sports conversation. Rodgers often responded to criticism directly. Sometimes he defended his views, other times he pushed back against analysts who questioned his decisions. That willingness to engage in public debate made him one of the most talked-about athletes in the NFL, but it also changed how people viewed him. Some fans appreciated Rodgers' honesty and independence. They saw a player willing to speak his mind without worrying about public approval. Others believed his comments created unnecessary distractions around the teams he played for.
So what's your spidey sense tell you? Do you think
About
he
what?
goes right back to the Steelers?
Yes, I do. If he wants to play. But if the Steelers aren't putting a contract in front of him and want him to give a decision between now and the new league year, which is essentially next Monday is when this stuff is going to start flying, they should put a contract in front of him, which might have been his message appearing on Pat's show.
In professional sports, perception can shift quickly. The same personality traits that once looked like confidence can begin to look like controversy depending on the moment. For Rodgers, the attention surrounding his opinions gradually became part of his identity in the public eye. The result is a career that now carries two parallel narratives. One story highlights a brilliant quarterback with extraordinary talent. The other focuses on a player whose outspoken nature has kept him at the center of constant debate. And as those narratives continue to collide, the question surrounding Rodgers' legacy grows more complicated.
When Aaron Rodgers decided to leave Green Bay and join the New York Jets, the move immediately became one of the most dramatic storylines in the NFL. The expectations were enormous. The Jets had spent years searching for a franchise quarterback capable of transforming the team into a contender. Rodgers, even late in his career, still carried the reputation of an elite player capable of elevating an entire offense. For New York, the move represented a chance to change the franchise's trajectory. For Rodgers, it represented something else: legacy. A successful run with the Jets could redefine how his career is remembered. Winning in New York would prove that Rodgers could succeed outside of Green Bay and silence critics who believed his best years were behind him. But the NFL rarely follows a perfect script. Injuries, roster challenges, and the pressure of playing in one of the most demanding media markets in the world quickly turn the situation into a complicated story. The spotlight in New York is unforgiving, and every development becomes a major headline. Every loss brings questions. Every setback sparks debate about whether the gamble will ultimately succeed. The move that once looked like a bold new chapter now feels like a turning point that could reshape how Rodgers' career is remembered. Because if the experiment works, Rodgers strengthens his legacy as one of the most resilient quarterbacks in NFL history. But if it fails, critics will argue that the final chapter of his career fell short of the expectations created by his remarkable talent. One of the most sensitive topics in the debate surrounding Aaron Rodgers involves leadership. Quarterbacks are expected to be more than just talented players. They're often seen as the emotional center of the team, the player who sets the tone in the locker room and keeps the offense unified during difficult moments. Throughout Rodgers' career, opinions about his leadership have been divided.
There's been no deadline that's been put in front of me. There's no contract, offer or anything. So there's nothing that I'm, having to debate between. I'm free agent, and I think there's conversations to be had down the line, but there hasn't been any progressive conversations. I love Mike, and Mike and I have kept in contact over the years. I've had conversations with Omar. I really, I think Omar, enjoyed having me there. I think the guys, had a positive response.
Some teammates have praised his intelligence and preparation. They describe a quarterback who studies the game obsessively and expects the same level of commitment from everyone around him. Others have suggested that Rodgers can be demanding and sometimes difficult to work with. In high-pressure environments like the NFL, strong personalities can create friction.
Star players often carry strong opinions about how the game should be played. When those opinions clash with coaches or teammates, the tension can become visible.
He claims to yearn for a private life, to be left alone, but still appears on the biggest sports platforms, does an interview with Tucker Carlson, does multiple appearances on Joe Rogan, the biggest podcast on earth, has made cameos on 3 different TV shows, including Game of Thrones, announced that he wanted to host Jeopardy, guest hosted Jeopardy, discussed the possibility of running for vice fucking president alongside RFK Jr., and agreed to be followed around for a 3-part Netflix documentary.
For Rodgers, those moments have occasionally fueled public speculation about his leadership style. Analysts debate whether he's misunderstood or simply uncompromising. Fans argue about whether the criticism is fair or exaggerated. But in the NFL, perception can matter almost as much as reality. And as Rodgers continues the final stages of his career, the discussion about leadership has become another factor shaping how his legacy will ultimately be remembered. Whenever Aaron Rodgers is discussed, the conversation almost always leads to the same question: where does he rank among the greatest quarterbacks in NFL history? From a pure talent perspective, many analysts argue Rodgers might be unmatched. His arm strength, mobility, and ability to make impossible throws look routine have made him one of the most naturally gifted quarterbacks the league has ever seen. But greatness in the NFL is rarely judged by talent alone. Championships matter, and this is where the comparison with Tom Brady becomes unavoidable. Brady's career includes 7 Super Bowl victories, a record that continues to dominate the GOAT debate. Rodgers, despite his brilliance, only has 1. That gap has fueled years of arguments across sports media. Some believe Rodgers is the most talented quarterback ever. Others believe championships ultimately define greatness. And until Rodgers adds another title, the debate between talent and legacy will continue to shape how his career is judged. For Aaron Rodgers, the final years of his career may ultimately decide how history remembers him. The Hall of Fame is not in question. His MVP awards, statistics, and Super Bowl victory already guarantee his place among the greatest players the NFL has ever seen. But legacy is about more than just accomplishments. It is about narrative. Rodgers will likely be remembered as one of the most gifted quarterbacks to ever step onto a football field. Yet his career has also been surrounded by controversy, debate, and moments that divided fans and analysts. Some will remember the spectacular throws, the MVP seasons, and the brilliance that defined his prime. Others will remember the controversies and the constant debates that followed him later in his career. That is what makes Rodgers' story so fascinating, because his legacy is not just about what he achieved, it is about how the football world chooses to remember him.